In every neighborhood, there's that one house with the perfect lawn, and that one neighbor who watches it like it's their job. But what happens when pride, peppers, and passive-aggressive policies collide? This isn't just a story about tomatoes. It's about power, pettiness, and the unexpected ways a garden can spark a suburban revolution. Mine started with a missing tomato and ended with a community flipped upside down, one pepper at a time. So buckle up, because in this quiet little cul-de-sac, things are about to get uncomfortably spicy. It started on a Monday. Not a dramatic Monday, not stormy or cursed, just a painfully normal one. The kind where nothing happens, and that's exactly what I'd been hoping for. I walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, slippers still half off my feet, and stared into my backyard, expecting the usual. Birds chirping, dew glistening on leaves, and most importantly, my tomatoes. Except they weren't there. The entire left row of my tomato plants was bare. Not a single red bulb remained. Just empty stems and a few half-torn leaves flapping in the breeze like nature's version of a crime scene. I blinked, then blinked again, rubbed my eyes. Nope, not a caffeine hallucination. They were gone. You don't understand. These weren't just tomatoes. These were my tomatoes. Sun-kissed, hand-pruned, heirloom varietals that had taken me months to perfect. I'd named one of them Steve. This wasn't nature at work. I'd fenced the garden against deer and raccoons. There were no paw prints, no chewed stems, no sign of a nighttime animal buffet. This felt personal. And that's when the first seed of suspicion was planted. Now, before you label me paranoid, let me introduce you to Paula Kensington, our Homeowners Association president, full-time retiree, and part-time dictator. She lived 4 houses down in a pristine, lavender-colored colonial, with an HOA rulebook, always within arm's reach, and a keep-off-the-lawn sign that might as well be engraved into her soul. Paula was the type who held clipboard inspections for holiday decorations and emailed passive-aggressive reminders about trash bin placement. I once got a written warning because my sunflowers appeared too whimsical. She'd always had a strange fascination with my garden, critiqued my planting symmetry, offered unsolicited advice on mulch. Once, she even suggested I align my tomato cages with the orientation of her front door for aesthetic harmony. So yeah, my mind went there. At first, I tried to be rational. Maybe a delivery guy tripped and fell into my plants. Maybe kids played a prank. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined having that many ripe tomatoes. But deep down, I knew. No squirrel could have been that precise. Still, I wasn't ready to accuse anyone. Yet. I needed proof. So I did what any slightly unhinged, tomato-loving adult would do. I turned detective. That afternoon, I drove to the nearest hardware store and picked up a motion-activated security camera. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch a culprit in action. I installed it right above the trellis, concealed beneath a bushy basil plant, aimed squarely at my prize produce. Then I waited. The next morning, I brewed my coffee a little earlier, phone in hand, heart racing. I opened the footage and skipped ahead. There were a few moths, a possum waddling by, and then her. At precisely 1:17 a.m., under the soft glow of the neighbor's porch light, Paula Kensington entered my backyard. She wore a floppy straw hat, gardening gloves, and, I swear on Steve's memory, a fanny pack. She moved casually, inspecting the plants with the precision of a surgeon. She plucked tomato after tomato, tucking them neatly into her pack like she was grocery shopping at Whole Foods. There was no hesitation, no remorse. And then, I kid you not, she pulled out a small spray bottle and misted my plants. What was in the bottle? Fertilizer? A tomato aging serum? Malicious HOA potion? I had no idea. All I knew was that Paula Kensington had declared war. I sat there in my kitchen, gripping my coffee mug so hard the handle nearly snapped off. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was stunned, offended, and weirdly amused. Of all people, Paula, The same woman who threatened to report a neighbor for painting their shutters non-regulation burgundy? The same woman who lectured me on neighborhood pride? She wasn't just stealing tomatoes. She was stealing dignity. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No. This needed to be bigger. If Paula wanted tomatoes, I'd give her tomatoes. Just not the kind she was expecting. And that's when the idea hit me. Spicy, fiery, devilishly brilliant. I pulled out my phone and Googled one word: Carolina Reaper. If Paula wanted to help herself to my crops like she owned the block, then let her take a bite of the hottest pepper known to man. A little culinary karma never hurt anyone. Well, maybe just a little. That day, I planted a new row. Right between the tomatoes, I tucked in Carolina Reapers like tiny red landmines of justice. I disguised them carefully, trimmed the leaves to look like tomato cousins, and waited. Paula had made a bold move, but I was about to raise the stakes, and the garden was about to get spicy. The trap was set. My garden looked innocent again, rows of fresh tomatoes basking in the early summer sun, now camouflaging a new, far more sinister breed. The Carolina Reapers were thriving, growing plump and furious, their glossy red skins glowing with ominous energy. I watered them like they were royalty, whispering sweet vengeance into the soil. They didn't need encouragement. They knew their purpose. For a few days, nothing happened. Paula's routine visits paused, and I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd gotten nervous. Or worse, bored. The camera captured nothing but squirrels, wind, and one confused raccoon sniffing the basil. Then on Thursday night, everything changed. At 1:09 a.m., the motion alert buzzed on my phone. I nearly dropped it, fumbling in the dark. I sat up, heart thudding in my chest, and tapped the camera feed. There she was, Paula. Same straw hat, same gloves. But this time, she brought backup. A collapsible basket and an LED flashlight on a neck strap. She wasn't sneaking. She was shopping. I watched in stunned silence as she strutted through my yard, humming softly to herself. She leaned down to inspect a pepper, one of the peppers, gave a slight shrug, and popped it into her bag. Then another, and then she did something bold. She picked the largest one, turned it in her gloved hand, and, I swear this is real, bit into it, right there, raw. No rinse, no hesitation. The footage didn't capture audio, but I didn't need sound to hear what happened next. Her body stiffened. Her arms jerked outward like someone had just hit her with a defibrillator. The flashlight flew from her neck and hit the grass. Her straw hat fell off. She stumbled backward, hands flying to her face, which turned from pale to pink to violently crimson in under 5 seconds. She flailed toward the garden hose like a horror movie extra, yanked it from its reel, and sprayed water directly into her open mouth. She slipped in the mud, landed on her rear, and dropped the basket, peppers scattering like guilty confetti around her. Then came the sprint. Paula fled my yard at a full wobble run, flapping hands at her tongue, her gardening gloves now flung somewhere into my rosemary. Her exit was glorious, like a flamingo in distress. I sat in bed watching the footage on loop, laughing so hard I had to pause to breathe. But underneath the laughter, something else stirred. This wasn't over. Paula might have been scorched, but she wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She was pride wrapped in pearls and petty rage. If anything, I just made things personal. The next morning, my suspicion was confirmed. I stepped outside to find a flyer taped to my mailbox. Urgent community notice. Hazardous gardening practices. Health code violation pending. Below it, in tiny HOA legal font, was a list of grievances. Alleged infractions. Reckless endangerment. Unregulated crops. At the bottom, Paula's signature. She hadn't called the police. She'd called the paperwork. And now, it was official. This wasn't a gardening prank anymore. It was a war. I didn't sleep much the night before the hearing. Paula's flyer had spread like wildfire. By Sunday, Nearly every mailbox in the neighborhood had a copy. She even laminated some and stapled them to trees, as if my garden was a public health crisis and not a backyard hobby. But what rattled me more than the flyer was the speed with which she summoned the HOA board. Less than 48 hours after the incident, a formal notice appeared in my inbox. Special HOA disciplinary meeting, alleged violation, hazardous gardening practices. Attendance, mandatory. Time, Monday 6:00 p.m. Location, Community Recreation Hall. Prepared statements encouraged. Prepared statements. What kind of dystopian HOA drama was this? Still, I wasn't going to roll over and let Paula burn me with her brand of bureaucratic fire. I had something she didn't. Proof. That security footage was more than just hilarious. It was damning. I spent hours editing the clip. I didn't add music, I didn't add captions. I didn't need to. Paula's late-night tomato raid and volcanic pepper meltdown spoke for themselves. On the evening of the hearing, I arrived early. The rec hall was half-filled already, a mix of curious onlookers, smirking supporters, and a few suspiciously stern-faced HOA board members. There was even a teenager sitting in the back with popcorn. Literal popcorn. Paula arrived 10 minutes late, as if to make an entrance. She wore a neck brace. Yes, a neck brace. Her oversized sunglasses hid most of her face, but the minute she sat down, the gasps started. Murmurs floated through the room like wildfire. She's injured? What happened? She bit a tomato? The board president, a balding man named Richard Greaves, banged his gavel like he thought it made him important. Let's come to order. We'll hear both sides, and the board will deliberate and rule accordingly. Ms. Holloway, since you filed the complaint, you may begin. Paula stood slowly, milking every second of drama. Her voice, when it came, was soft and trembling, laced with faux emotion. I never thought I'd be here. In pain, frightened, afraid of stepping into my own neighborhood. She placed a hand on her chest. I was just taking an innocent evening stroll when I noticed something suspicious in Mr. Thompson's garden. An odor. An odd glimmer in the moonlight. I leaned over, concerned for the safety of our children, and then I blacked out. She dabbed at invisible tears with a tissue. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, unable to breathe. I still wake up coughing. I sat frozen. It was masterful. A monologue straight out of a Lifetime courtroom special. Thank you, Ms. Holloway, Richard said gravely. Mr. Thompson, your response. I stood slowly, tried to keep my voice steady. I never invited Ms. Holloway into my yard. She entered without permission, in the dead of night, and stole produce. Something she's done multiple times. Murmurs. I reached into my bag, took out a small USB, and handed it to the HOA secretary. Here's the security footage. Time-stamped, no edits. I'd like everyone to see it. Richard hesitated, but the secretary had already plugged it into the projector. And then, silence. As the black and white video played, you could hear the tension thicken. The audience saw Paula sneaking in, saw her taking the pepper, saw the bite, the stumble, the hose chaos, the dash into the street. Laughter broke out around the room, stifled at first, then unstoppable. Even Richard had to cover his mouth. But Paula stood frozen, red creeping up her cheeks, neck brace suddenly looking ridiculous. When the clip ended, I turned back to the board. I grow peppers. I didn't force anyone to eat them. Especially not in the middle of the night. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to regain order. This certainly changes things. But Paula wasn't done. She stood again, voice cracking now, not from emotion but anger. That footage was a setup. He planted those peppers on purpose. He made them look like tomatoes to hurt me. This was a trap. He's a menace, a danger to the entire neighborhood. She was shouting now, wild-eyed, her composure gone. And then, from the back of the room, Margaret, the board secretary, raised her hand. Soft-spoken, always overlooked Margaret. "I'd like to say something," she said, standing slowly. Richard blinked. "Go ahead." Margaret clasped her hands. "I've lived next to Mr. Thompson for 11 years. I've seen Paula in his yard at least 5 times this month alone, always after dark. She's commented on his tomatoes, his layout, even asked me once what fertilizer he uses. This wasn't an accident. It was theft. And now it's just revenge." Gasps. Paula turned, stunned. "You're lying." "I'm tired," Margaret said, still calm. "Tired of your threats, your rules. This whole meeting is ridiculous." The room fell completely silent. And in that moment, the tide turned. I didn't need to say another word. Richard conferred briefly with the board, then cleared his throat. "We find Mr. Thompson not in violation of any HOA rule or code. In fact, based on tonight's testimony and evidence, we recommend a warning be issued to Ms. Holloway regarding unauthorized access to private property." A collective exhale. Paula let out a guttural noise, yanked off her neck brace, and stormed out. I sat down, legs trembling. Not from fear, but the adrenaline of standing up to something I never thought I could win against, but I had, because this was no longer just about tomatoes, or even peppers. This was about respect, community, and knowing when to stop pretending you're the hero in a story you started by being the villain. And in that moment, I realized something else. Paula had just lost more than a hearing. She'd lost the neighborhood. For a while, it felt like the storm had passed. After the HOA hearing, Karen, yes, let's drop the Paula formalities. She had fully earned her Karen stripes, vanished. No pastel clipboard patrols, no late-night garden strolls, no cryptic HOA bulletins slid under my door. But peace in the suburbs is fragile. And Karen? Karen was like crabgrass. You think you've pulled her out, but she's just waiting for a new patch of lawn to destroy. I knew better than to let my guard down, especially when my neighbors started calling me the Pepper Vigilante. It wasn't long before strange things started happening. It began subtly. One morning, I found my compost bin overturned, contents smeared across the driveway. A day later, my mailbox had a polite but anonymous letter tucked inside. "Some neighbors find your garden aggressive. This is a family neighborhood, not a chili farm. Please consider planting something less inflammatory." Then came the rats. Yes, rats. One evening I walked out back and found tiny chew marks on my new raised beds. 2 nights later, I spotted a pair of beady eyes reflecting from the compost pile. I'd lived here 7 years and never had a single pest problem. But suddenly, rats. I wasn't a conspiracy theorist, but I wasn't naive either. I had a sinking suspicion that Karen had moved from HOA warfare to guerrilla sabotage. And sure enough, Jerry confirmed it. He showed up at my door one afternoon, holding a roll of duct tape and looking like he'd just finished spying on a mafia deal. "You're not going to believe this," he whispered. He handed me his phone and played a video. The footage, captured from his Ring camera, showed Karen at 2:14 a.m., tiptoeing into his backyard in a bathrobe and slippers, carrying a plastic container. She opened his compost bin, dumped in a suspicious mixture, then sprinted away like a raccoon on espresso. Jerry looked at me, eyes wide. "I think she's baiting rodents." I stared at the video, stunned. "This is psychotic," I muttered. "She's escalating," he said. "You need to go public." He wasn't wrong, but I also wasn't sure how to fight a neighbor who operated like a cartoon villain at 3 a.m. So I did the only thing I knew would work. I got creative. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. That night, I dug through my garage and pulled out a dusty project I'd never finished. An old scarecrow kit I bought during a Halloween sale. Within an hour, I'd modified it into what I called the Scare Karen. It wore one of her discarded flyers as a cape, had giant reflective eyes, and a fake motion-activated voice box I rigged to say, "Private property. Violators will be composted." I installed it directly facing her house. The next morning, she came out to get her paper, saw it, and screamed. Sweet, glorious, neighborhood-shaking scream. But this wasn't just petty. It was strategy. The real retaliation came later that week. While checking my peppers in the greenhouse, Jerry and I had quietly built in his backyard. I noticed a torn corner of the screen. Something had gotten in. Or someone. A few plants were trampled. The peppers I'd been hybridizing, my prized Hellfire crossbreeds, were missing. Missing. It hit me like a sucker punch. This wasn't about tomatoes anymore. Karen had crossed the line. She wasn't just trying to destroy my garden. She was trying to erase my progress, my pride, the quiet therapy I found in planting seeds and watching them grow. I sat down on the floor of the greenhouse, hands shaking, staring at the torn netting. And that's when I found it. A scrap of fabric, caught on the jagged metal edge of the screen frame. Lavender, soft, and faintly familiar. I lifted it to my nose. Lavender perfume, Karen's brand. You can't make this stuff up. Fueled by a cocktail of fury and caffeine, I marched home and opened my files. It was time to do what I should have done from the beginning. I called my cousin Allie, a civil attorney with a love for neighborhood disputes. "You remember the pepper incident?" I asked. "Still the funniest legal email I've ever read," she said. "Well, now it's theft, and possibly biological sabotage." "Biological? Jesus, okay. I'm listening." By the end of the call, we had a plan. Nothing aggressive. Just the start of a formal cease and desist. Karen had danced on the edge of legal for too long. Now, the paper trail would begin, and I wasn't the only one waking up. That week, Margaret, the quiet HOA secretary who'd once defended me, knocked on my door. "I heard what happened in your greenhouse," she said softly. "You heard?" She nodded. "Karen tried to get me to co-sign a motion to restrict all non-native produce in residential gardens." I blinked. "Non-native produce?" "She said spicy crops attract crime." I laughed, until I realized she wasn't kidding. "She's unhinged," I said. Margaret looked around and leaned closer. "She's obsessed with control. She doesn't care about the garden. She cares that people are disobeying her." That stuck with me. Karen wasn't just fighting tomatoes or peppers. She was fighting freedom. And somehow, that made her more dangerous. Later that night, I stood in my yard and looked out over the fence. Karen's lights were off. Her dog's pink collar glowed faintly in the dark. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She'd made one mistake too many. And I was no longer alone. By the end of the week, it wasn't just my war anymore. The signs were subtle at first. A few neighbors started planting their own tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, some for the first time in years. Margaret's begonias were suddenly surrounded by chili sprouts. The Thompsons installed vertical planters on their porch. Even Jerry, who once swore off gardening after killing a cactus, had a proud row of habaneros lined up like soldiers on his fence. But the real shift came after Karen made her next move. She called an emergency HOA meeting, not to address crime, not to handle noise complaints, but to propose a formal ban on non-regulated gardening activity. In her words, to maintain aesthetic integrity and prevent agricultural contamination. Yes, agricultural contamination. The agenda she posted on the community bulletin board read like a dystopian novel. Mandatory garden inspections. Banned plant list under HOA review. Soil sample submission requirements. It was peak Karen, and it backfired spectacularly. The neighborhood, already annoyed by her behavior, saw this as the final straw. Even the folks who used to nod politely at her HOA patrols began grumbling over fences. I didn't have to rally anyone. They came to me. It started with a knock, then another, then a dozen. People showed up at my door carrying pots, produce, even printed HOA bylaws. "Is this legal?" one woman asked, holding a zucchini like it was evidence. "Can she actually make us register our soil?" another neighbor demanded. By the third day, we had a full-blown neighborhood rebellion forming on my lawn. I set up my garage as a kind of command center. Whiteboard, flyers, laminated property codes. Thanks again, Jerry. And a shared Google Doc titled Suburban Gardeners for Freedom. We called it the Backyard Alliance. It was part protest group, part gardening club, and all personal. Karen, of course, responded the only way she knew how, by doubling down. She posted a formal letter accusing me of inciting agricultural anarchy and encouraging botanical bullying. Yes, those were her actual words. But she wasn't ready for what came next. We held a neighborhood potluck. On the surface, it looked like a friendly get-together. Kids playing, folding chairs lined up, paper lanterns swaying under string lights. But the menu told a different story. Every single dish featured peppers, ghost pepper salsa, Carolina Reaper chili, habanero cornbread, even ghost pepper lemonade. It was equal parts celebration and inside joke. Jerry wore a t-shirt that read "Got capsaicin" and handed out free seed packets labeled Resistance Blend. Karen didn't attend, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. Her grip on the neighborhood was slipping. That night, something shifted in me too. For months, I'd thought this feud was about tomatoes, or reapers, or revenge. But now, I saw it for what it really was. Karen was the symptom. The disease was fear. Fear of stepping out of line, of challenging authority, of planting a damn pepper because it didn't match the aesthetic. And people were tired of it. The next day, I received a letter from the HOA. But this one was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a resignation. Karen had stepped down as HOA president. Effective immediately. No ceremony. No farewell speech. Just a short note citing increased hostility and a need to focus on personal recovery. The room spun a little as I read it. I hadn't expected her to quit. Had we won? I walked outside and found neighbors already whispering. Margaret waved from her porch with a rare, triumphant smile. Jerry raised a glass of pepper-infused lemonade in salute. The spell had been broken. But part of me wasn't ready to celebrate. Karen wasn't the kind to vanish quietly, and something about her silence felt too quiet. That evening, just as I was cleaning up after the potluck, I noticed a faint scent on the breeze. Lavender. I turned quickly. Nothing. Just shadows and wind. But deep down I knew. This wasn't the end. It was the eye of the storm. The lavender scent was not my imagination. The next morning, I found a handwritten note shoved under my garden gate. It was folded into a crisp triangle like an old-school love letter. But this wasn't love. Not even close. It read, "Enjoy your little rebellion while it lasts. You think you've won, but you forget. People like you come and go. Rules last forever. K." No signature needed. I recognized the handwriting. Karen hadn't gone quietly into retirement. She was retreating, regrouping, and the war was about to enter its final chapter. I didn't panic. I'd expected this. What I didn't expect was what happened next. 2 days later, a letter from the county showed up. Not HOA, not Karen, the county. Certified, stamped, official. The notice said I was under investigation for unlicensed agricultural activity, possible sale of unauthorized plant hybrids, and, the cherry on top, violation of state agricultural health codes. My stomach dropped. Karen had gone above the HOA. She'd filed a complaint at the county level. And worse, she'd claimed my peppers were being sold at local markets as weaponized crops. Weaponized crops. It sounded insane, because it was. But bureaucracy doesn't need logic, just paperwork. And Karen was the queen of paperwork. I spent the next 48 hours compiling every document I had. Original seed invoices, property maps, Lab reports showing the peppers were 100% natural. Security footage proving no distribution or sales had occurred. I even got Margaret, now emboldened post-HOA, to write a signed statement confirming my garden had never hosted any commercial activity. But Karen had gone further than I thought. She'd sent photos of my plants to a local news station, dramatically edited and filtered for maximum chaos. One close-up of a Reaper pepper was framed like it belonged in a horror movie, the headline beneath it reading, "Suburban Botanist Creating Dangerous Superplants in Backyard." The article was pure clickbait, but it worked. Within hours, journalists were calling, bloggers were writing exposés. A YouTube channel even made a 12-minute video titled "The Pepper Menace, Is Your Neighborhood Safe?" Jerry texted me, "Bro, you're trending. #Peppergate." I was becoming a meme, and not in a good way. For the first time since this began, I genuinely considered giving up. Maybe I could rip out the garden, apologize, move on. Then, a knock on the door. Not a neighbor, not the sheriff, the mayor. Mayor Kathy Davenport. Mid-50s, blazer rolled to the elbows. A woman who had built her campaign on community over control. She stepped into my yard like a commander entering a war zone, glanced at my chili plot, and said dryly, "So, this is the battlefield." I nodded, exhausted. She took out her phone, snapped a picture, and grinned. "My son just planted reapers in our backyard. You're not the problem. You're the warning sign that we've let petty rules get bigger than people." I blinked. "Wait, you're not here to shut me down?" She laughed. "No, I'm here to make sure Karen never gets a clipboard again." Apparently, the viral news stories had reached City Hall. But rather than condemning me, they revealed something else, a pattern. Karen had been filing dozens of complaints, not just against me, but across the district, for years. Most were dismissed, but together they painted a picture of abuse of process. The county quietly launched their own internal review. 3 days later, I received a new letter. All allegations dropped, case closed, no violations found. At the bottom, "Apologies for the inconvenience." But the real moment of truth came at the next neighborhood town hall. Karen showed up. Yes, she was back. Blonde bob, sharp heels, and that familiar look of passive-aggressive confidence she wore like armor. She took the floor like nothing had happened and tried to rally the board. Her pitch? "We've become too relaxed. We've allowed chaos. We need structure." But this time, no one clapped. Then Margaret stood. "Structure's fine. Tyranny isn't." Another neighbor chimed in. "You tried to ruin a man over tomatoes." Then Jerry. "And you poured cement in his fire pit. That's not policy. That's just weird." Karen's voice faltered. She tried to recover, but the room was no longer hers. She was a relic of a system everyone had quietly grown to resent, and just like that, the vote was called. Karen was permanently removed from any HOA leadership roles. Her face didn't move, not once, but her hands trembled. She left without a word. Not long after, the for sale sign went up in her yard. By the end of the month, her house was empty, gone. We kept gardening, not out of spite anymore, but pride. The whole neighborhood joined in. We renamed the HOA, Harmony of Agriculture. Okay, technically still HOA, but way better. We hosted our first neighborhood garden festival, complete with booths, chili cook-offs, and a pepper-eating contest Jerry instantly regretted entering. People were closer now. And me? I still grow tomatoes. But every once in a while, I plant a single Carolina Reaper, bright red, in the middle of the plot, just to remind us that even in the quietest suburbs, sometimes it takes a little heat to grow something real.